the habit of mastering uncertainty is you understand that every environment requires conscious, deliberate decision making, and you have mastered this ability to calm yourself in a way that allows you to focus on the immediate, take care of that, and then focus on the next thing. The good news is everybody can generate those habits. Everybody can become a master of uncertainty. We just have to understand how to practice it and start deliberately practicing it.
Hey guys, I'm going to do a different introduction today with Rich Diviney. We had a great conversation for 10 minutes before we got on, but there's so many attributes here of this guy that I want to introduce so it gives us some context and perspective. It might be the fewest questions that I ever have to ask on a podcast because the guy's so brilliant. He's so accomplished. He's done so many different things. I'm sure we're going to get some self-deprecation, and he's going to be very humble today, but don't be tricked. So this guy, Rich, here today, served 20 years in the Navy. As a part of that, also a Navy SEAL. We all love to talk to these guys. I think somewhere around 13 deployments, 11 of those were Iraq and Afghanistan. There's probably hours and hours and hours of stories that we won't even get into. But then also after the normal SEAL stuff, I believe he was very involved in developing the SEAL process and probably evaluations of people getting into the program. He was an officer in charge of training them, and then retired in 2017. But since his retirement, another fascinating 7 or 8 years that brings this guy with us today, and worked with Simon Sinek Incorporated, became a consultant and speaker, traveled the normal path of all these guys. What's the next evolution of my life? And then's written some books. So it's exciting to get into today. In 2021, he wrote a book called The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. Let's see if we have time to hit on 25. That's overwhelming to me. And then the second book that just came out, which is putting him on his tour of expanding his horizons for 2025, is The Masters of Uncertainty, and it's the Navy SEAL way. We're going to talk about turning stress into success for us and our team today. So there's not even a question to ask because you're so complicated, but maybe so simple. But how in the world, if your focus is focused on like these innate attributes that lead to elite performance, I hope that's a good way to describe what you do.
Yeah.
Where does that start for any of us? Maybe we haven't become a Navy SEAL and traveled that journey. Where does that path start?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So really looking forward to the conversation. So, I think the first place it starts is to define performance. And oftentimes we get caught up in this idea of peak performance. I know when I started this work, people were always talking about peak performance and how do they peak here, peak there, peak everywhere. People were often asking me or telling me, hey, you Navy SEALs, you're the ultimate peak performers. And I would disagree with that statement. The reason why is because peak by definition is an apex. There's only one place you can go from an apex, and that's downward, right? So the other thing about peak is peak often has to be planned for, scheduled, and prepared for. So in other words, the pro football player plans and schedules his entire week so that he can peak for 3 hours on Sunday. Well, we don't get to do that. Navy SEALs don't get to do that. None of us regular human beings get to do that. We have to actually perform with what we've got in the moment. So I used to say we're in fact optimal performers. Optimal performance means I'm going to do the very best in the moment, whatever the best looks like in the moment. All right. So sometimes our best in the moment looks like peak and everything's clicking and it's flow states and groovy and cool. However, sometimes our best in the moment is I am literally head down, nugging it out, slogging it out, and it's dirty and it's gritty and it's ugly and it's hard. And that is still performing optimally. And so optimal performance allows us a couple of really important things. First of all, it allows us to celebrate those times when we are not at peak because we can't be at peak all the time. The other thing it allows us to do is responsible energy management. In other words, I don't have to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. I could be modulating my energy to whatever degree I need. And I often say, we'd sometimes be in the helicopters flying into combat, right? And the guys around me would be sleeping. They'd be napping. And there's a reason for that. It's because we don't know what's coming. We don't know what energy, how long we're going to be out there, what's going to be required energetically. We're not going to waste an ounce of our energy doing things we don't need to do. So the first idea is to think that optimal performance is this umbrella underneath which peak lives and gutting it out lives and even recovery lives. All this to say is when we're talking about performance and elite performance, I think elite performance or high performing teams or individuals is not really just defined as doing things great when things are going great. High performing teams, they perform when things aren't going great, when the what hits the fan, as do high performing humans. And so to start to examine and explore performance at those levels, when the what his is hitting the fan, when we're at our most raw, we must take a deeper look into those things, those elements about ourselves that we bring into the equation. And that was really the impetus of the whole attributes concept.
I'm sitting here thinking of all the people we've worked with. I'm like, is the more important question the how or the why?
I think. I mean, I think if we want to get better, the more important is the how. If we want to understand or be, I think inspiration comes from why. I think performance comes from how. So
So
they're
we need to
both.
spend. You'd make an argument. We need to spend way more time in the how.
Well, again, I think yes. If we're no, I wouldn't say way more time. It's a great question. I think what the why does for us is it allows context often. But I think why and how often become interrelated in terms of, if this is why something's happening, it usually starts to bleed into the hows, because again, if we know how, we can repeat it. You can't necessarily repeat it if you just know why. So I think both are important, because one provides inspiration and direction, the other provides instruction and kind of and a roadmap, if you will.
These 25 attributes, the hidden drivers of optimal performance that was in the book Attributes, did you already kind of have those documented, maybe in the final journey that you were in the Navy, where you helped, I don't know if the right word is train, but train and develop these SEALs? Did you start to document them as you went through the process, or did you kind of know them as you went to write the book?
Yeah, it's a great one. So I got bad news for you in terms of timing. We have 41 attributes now. It's not just 25. So, but the impetus of those, and even when I was writing the book, I knew there were more than 25. I just, you can't pitch a 900-page book to a publisher. They don't like those things. So I wanted to focus in on what I thought the most important ones were. In the Navy, when I did the work, what we did was we began to determine, or we attempted to determine, what the attributes were that we were looking for specifically for the SEALs we were doing assessment and selection on. We came up back at that time with 36 attributes, and I brought those 36 attributes with me and had them in front of me as I began to put together the book. The thing is, when I began to really make some more direct and precise distinctions about attributes and skills, what I recognized is some of those 36 were in fact skills; they weren't attributes. And some of those 36 weren't really appropriately defined. And so I used the list of the 36 as kind of a baseline, and then began to build the list for the book from that. But as in any book project, things change. I think when I first started the book, the first pitch of the book was 36 attributes, and then as I began writing it, and we kind of refined and modified, I think it went down to 28, and it went to 29, and then we ended up on maybe we're at 22 at some point. We ended up at 25. But again, right now we're at 41, and I think we're always open to the idea, the fact that there may be more. There's also possibilities that there, maybe a couple of the 41 could be downgraded, but the list has matured and evolved throughout the time frame.
My brain goes to so many questions around the 22 and 25 and 36. So there's this idea out here in the world with companies, because you're out here engaging in probably in governmental entities, but then going out in private companies and speaking and consulting. There's this idea that, do you find talent or do you develop it?
Yeah.
So it seemed like what you're speaking to here, you needed to find them to become SEALs.
Yeah, so I think that, again, what I would define talent is it's a combination, it's a synchronization between attributes and skills, right? And so I think in any endeavor, you are looking for a little bit of both. However, I would argue that that talent, for the most part, can come from attributes first, because we all know, and we all have examples, and I have examples in the SEAL teams where the environment, the culture exploded the skill. In fact, it brought up the skill. So you put someone with the right attribute set, who's a culture fit, into the right environment, that person's skills, their overall skill, their overall performance accelerates a great deal. Same deal. You put someone who has a bunch of skills into the wrong culture, wrong environment, and you'll see performance often go down. So I think what we have to do as teams and organizations is first understand what about the culture makes it so. That's usually a combination of attributes that they that they prioritize, values, things like that, and then begin to look for cultural fits who have the qualities that will really accelerate. You can do this to any degree you want. I would imagine that, for example, Navy SEALs, for example, for basic SEAL training, you don't have to know anything going to basic SEAL training. I never shot a weapon in my life before I went to the Navy. There are guys who showed up to SEAL training who'd never seen the ocean before, right? And by the end of SEAL training, they're scuba diving, right? So the philosophy in the SEAL environment is, I don't care what skills you have. You could have nothing. We will teach you as long as you have the attributes. We'll teach you. Obviously, not necessarily the case in all endeavors. There are many positions or teams where there's some prerequisites required. You wouldn't want to hire a CFO who never had any accounting experience, right? But holistically, I think what businesses and teams get wrong is they deprioritize attributes too often, and they prioritize skills too often. So they put these visible things we can see, measure, and test at the forefront, and that's not necessarily telling us if someone is going to be a good fit or in fact can do the job when the what hits the fan.
See, it seems like we're sitting here talking about like an ability and a willingness to learn
That's
anything.
part of it. That's part of it. I mean, because and learnability is an attribute, humility is an attribute, curiosity and open mindedness are all attributes. But I think every skill is buttressed by whatever attributes allow for that skill to happen. So I think the willingness to learn is certainly a part of an environment, but even a willingness to learn. I mean, if we're the way I like to describe us in terms of attributes is we're all automobiles, okay? But all of us are different types. So some of us are Jeeps, some of us are SUVs, some of us are Ferraris, and there's no judgment there because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it behooves us to figure out what kind of car we are, because the friction in our lives might be because we've been in a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track this whole time, or vice versa. And so even absent a predominant quote willingness to learn, if you find out and can get right what kind of vehicle you are and get yourself on the right track, the rest is going to just take care of itself.
Did you develop that metaphor building SEAL teams?
I wish I could say I did. I think I developed the metaphor when I wrote the book, and I think the reason is because SEAL teams is a very distinct environment. We have a very distinct thing we're looking for. And I don't know what kind of car that is, but we're all in many ways the same version of the vehicle. We just bring to a different thing. But certainly, while writing the book, we start to look at and you start to work with a whole diverse scope of different professions and niches, if you will. You start to recognize, oh, wait a second, this is the movie Cars is brilliant because it accentuates this in a very entertaining way. But yeah, we come to the table with different things, and that's hugely advantageous if you understand that.
Who's your favorite character in Cars?
Gosh, man, it's been a while since I think Doc.
Mater. I'll just say Mater's mine, the rusty truck.
Yeah. I liked Doc, because I love Paul Newman. I grew up in Connecticut, and Paul Newman lived in our town, and I worked at a marina there. And Paul Newman kept his boat there, so he'd come down and go on his boat once in a while. He was just the nicest guy. He'd just always have a nice chat with you, and he was just a wonderful dude. He loves driving, or he loved driving, So I don't know. So I was predisposed to Doc, So
he seems like Paul Newman. I've always been fascinated. He seems so stoic, so different than so many of the actors.
Yeah, he was a regular dude. He really was, and he came across that. I remember one time he was coming down to his boat, and I was one of the things we did the boats were on mooring, so we drive people to their boats, and his was on a mooring, and he came down. And so we're chatting as I'm taking him to his boat, and as he's getting on his boat, he's like, "Oh, by the way, just so you know, Redford's showing up in about a half hour, so he'll be coming." And I was like, and of course, it didn't register with what he said. I was like, "Oh, okay." I realized it was Robert Redford because about 30 minutes later, Robert Redford shows up, and I take him, and he was just as nice of a guy. But you just have those, when you have those instances of people who just are normal, nice human beings, it's always cool.
Were you starstruck as a kid at all, or did it help you to be around those guys to see they're normal?
Yeah, I don't think I was very starstruck. I thought it was cool. As a kid, we alluded to this when we were having our conversation. I grew up wanting to be a fighter pilot. My twin brother, and I wanted to be fighter pilots. All we wanted to do was be, and specifically Navy pilots. We wanted to land on ships, but any type of fighter jet. I found myself more starstruck when I would see a fighter jet in person than any famous person. Right? My dad would go to air shows and you'd see a real live F-14 or an F-16, and I'd be more starstruck when I saw fighter jets in person than I see when famous people. So I guess it's just whatever.
Whatever we put on a pedestal, right?
What now?
Whatever we put on a pedestal.
Yeah, whatever you put on a pedestal, that's what
Yeah.
that's what you got.
So what do you do recently? I just read an article where a $70 million jet just ended up rolling off of an aircraft carrier.
I saw that.
What the heck does a team do? I mean, rolling it back to what do you do in that environment if the admiral or whoever is operating that aircraft carrier? What do you do in that moment?
Well, as the admiral, you start to look for accountability. First of all, you take accountability. That's number one, and then you start to look for what are some of the things that allowed that to happen, and what are the ways you could mitigate it happening again. Listen, everybody in those positions knows that things happen, accidents happen, and you can't prevent everything. What you can do is in those instances, just ask yourself, do the diligence on saying, okay, were there things that were missed that caused that? And make sure if there's things we can correct that will prevent that from happening again, let's do it. And oftentimes the answer to that is yes, there are. But the military is any endeavor is difficult. Military for certain is an endeavor where you're doing difficult things, dangerous things, high stakes things all the time. And so the fact that those inside of those environments 99% of the time things go well is just remarkable. It really is, and that's due to the diligence of the folks doing it, and it's due to the diligence of those folks who made the mistakes before them, doing the diligence on understanding what happened and doing the after action and correcting potential mistakes. But I saw the same article just this morning, so I have no context of what actually happened.
Me either, yeah.
But the flight deck's a tight place.
Yeah, right.
It's not necessarily surprising that happens once in a while.
Did you end up being able to? Did you become a pilot and land jets on aircraft carriers?
No, I went SEALs. My twin brother ended up being a Marine pilot. He flew the Harrier, so he flew the jump jet, which meant he did his initial carrier landings, but after that he was all vertical landings. So I really lived vicariously through him. I got to ride in some jets. I did a carrier deployment, so I got to ride in some jets, but no, my pathway was Navy SEAL. So I jumped out of more airplanes than I flew. So
there you go. Right? Are you guys jealous of each other in your stories?
Not at all. Not at all. We're very proud of each other. I'm proud to have lived vicariously through him. He's proud to live vicariously through me. We're proud of our pathways. So yeah, not at all.
Did you know in 2017, after you served the 20 years and retired, first, is the private world us civilians out here? Welcome to the party for the past 8 years.
Yeah,
I had a brother that was in the Army, the 82nd, and jumped out of stuff. So he was 9 years older than me. So he started calling me a civilian. I was like, what is going on in this world?
Right.
But is the private world out here, private entities, private companies, is it similar to being in the military? Do the same attributes apply? Did you struggle to say how do they apply, or does it feel naturally similar?
It's so the same attributes don't necessarily apply because every niche, every business, every organization is going to have its own specific set of attributes that allow for and define success in that niche. In other words, the list of attributes that define the great SEAL team is going to look a little different than the list of attributes that define the great sales team or surgical team or teaching team. So the attribute list is different. I think similar to the extent that when it comes to leadership, there's one common denominator that you cannot get around, and that is people. Right? You don't lead machines, you don't lead processes, you lead people. You manage machines, you manage processes, but you lead people. So I think it is similar in the sense that and I think this is why I get really jazzed about the things that I talk about, and even my buddies who are in the leadership space. I guess I err more, or I focus more on performance, because I think even leadership starts with performance, right? But whether you're talking leadership or performance, I get really excited about the fact that if you do just a little bit of work, you can take the lessons you learn from those environments where people might be like, how can I even relate to Navy SEAL stuff? But if you just do a little bit of work, it's not too much of a leap to translate lessons that you learn on the battlefield to civilian life, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with humans, you're dealing with human behavior, you're dealing with human performance. So I love and have loved the project of taking those distinctions and humanizing them in a way that allows people to say, you know what, my biggest compliment is when I go give talks to groups, and we talked about diversity and diverse groups, people of all different walks of life and gender and color and things like that. And people come up to me who are like so different than me, and they say, I just want to say how much what you said related to me. And I feel like that's my biggest compliment. It's the biggest compliment for me, because what I've done is I've taken this thing that people put on a pedestal and made it and talked about it in a way that people say, I can just take what Rich said, and I can apply it to my own life. So there are similarities, yes. I think it's our job as leaders and as people who kind of try to bring ideas out to the world to humanize them in a way that allows for people to see those similarities.
Before we jump off of attributes and get back in here to the book that you really wanted to write from the beginning, the one you just wrote at the end about Masters of Uncertainty, do you consistently go to, are there one or two favorite, when I say favorite attributes, are there favorites that like, man, that's really a core go-to? You give me those one or two things and we can build a lot from it.
Yeah, well, so again, I want to highlight the subjectivity of people's experiences, and the fact that depending on what environment you're in life, certain attributes will gain or require predominance or prioritization. However, when put to the wall, I will say that the grit attributes, courage, perseverance, adaptability, resilience, I think those are likely the most important, just to have a meaningful human experience, right? And again, courage, the ability to step outside of our comfort zone, to do things that we may not want to do. This is what's caused our species to go from cave dweller to space explorer. Just this idea of courage itself. Same with perseverance, same with adaptability, and same with resilience. And so I think if I were to prioritize any, I'd probably prioritize those. The grit category, which is made up of those four attributes.
Can you see that in people without the stressed environment? Can you see those?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, again, well, I guess it depends on the attribute. Adaptability is simply the ability to easily flex and adapt to an environment that's changing outside your control, right? That doesn't necessarily need to require stress and fear. It often does, certainly, but it doesn't need to. Resilience, again, are we able to bounce back from not only failure but also success? Resilience goes both ways. How quickly and effectively you can get back to baseline. That doesn't necessarily require a lot of stress. It often does. Courage is going to require discomfort. Courage, by definition, is the ability to step into our discomfort, which means that autonomic arousal is getting raised. Our amygdala is getting tickled, and we are presented neurologically with the choices that we all know: fight or flight. If we choose fight, i.e., step into our fear, we have courage. That's the courage switch. That's known as the courage switch in the brain. It's a specific switch, and we get a dopamine reward for that, by the way. So courage requires, it's neurologically proven that what we know has been philosophically true, which is courage cannot exist in the absence of fear. You have to have it. Fear has to be present. And then perseverance. Perseverance typically implies some level of struggle. It's perseverance is defined as the ability to get knocked down 7 times and get up 8. Right. Every time I get knocked down, I just keep coming. So I think perseverance does imply some level of struggle. Whether that struggle involves fear, that's one thing. It doesn't necessarily have to, but certainly challenge and stress is involved. So I think there's a sliding scale for all of them. But I want people to understand that anybody can get better at this if they can practice this stuff by doing little things. I mean, in other words, stepping into your fear doesn't mean you have to go skydiving tomorrow. It could mean I'm going to start the conversation with that stranger that I've been wanting to and I've been hesitant to, right? It could mean I'm going to go take that improv class I've been hesitating to, or learn that new language. Whatever those little steps into our discomfort are, in fact, opportunities to practice this stuff and get better.
Yeah, when I reflect on my wife, even the 12 and 13 and 14-year-old version of me, I'm benefited today because all the things that I did, all the different perspective. When somebody said, hey, go out and try out for the school play, and I did, and I got a part. And then I have more lines than anybody as a 17-year-old kid and thought I was all tough and cool. And the lights come up and I'm the guy that has the first line and I forget the first line.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, we have a part of our brain. It's been, I don't know how recently discovered, but it's called the anterior mid cingulate cortex. Okay, it's a small part of our brain, and this brain has been proven. Neuroscience have seen that this part of our brain fires off when people are in anticipation of challenge and struggle, and also in challenge and struggle. Okay, it fires off and it actually grows. The more we actually do hard stuff that we don't necessarily want to do, this part of our brain grows. And as it grows, it gets easier to do hard stuff. It gets more habitized or habitualized, which means those of us who've had the opportunity and the gift of doing hard things as we grew up, I believe there's an advantage there because we've just gotten more comfortable, we've gotten better, we've aired ourselves towards more being masters of uncertainty than we thought because we've just done those things. And so I think anytime, and then for all the parents out there, I do not encourage, being Machiavellian with your kids. That's silly, but certainly don't discourage your kids from trying a bunch of stuff. I'm always like, hey, throw as many things in front of their windshield as possible, i.e., don't make them do one sport for their whole
Yeah. Yeah.
From age 5. Okay. But again, I don't want to judge, and I wouldn't judge, but the more diversified stuff you can throw in front of your kid's windshield, the more they're going to practice this thing called struggle. And then, are we rewarding the proper thing? We've never rewarded our kids for winning. Winning is just the result, right? We reward our kids for working hard and taking a risk and trying. And so even if they take a risk and fail or they lose, the reward is because they took the risk. That's where you start growing.
Goes back to the idea of what you said, the peak is so temporary, right?
Yeah, it really is. Really is.
It's like when you hear all these stories, you've done probably way more physical, difficult things in your life than I have. But when people climb Mount Everest, it's one of the most dangerous things I guess you can do for an adventure sport, maybe jumping out of planes and all that. But you hear people die every year. And all that preparation, all of the experience, all of the risk, all the danger to get to the peak and stay up there for what, 10 minutes?
10 minutes, yeah.
And come back down.
Right. Yeah. It's the journey, right? It's the journey. Yeah. And I think, I think so. I think our responsibility is to give our kids, the ability to experience, and to learn, and to grow. We know, neuroscientifically, we learn more when we lose, when bad things happen than when good things happen. This, by the way, is neuroscientifically proven. And the reason is because, and so, by the way, so one of my good friends, and he wrote the foreword to my book, is Andrew Huberman, has a great podcast called the Huberman Lab. And so he and I talk about this and have talked about this at length. But one of the things we've talked about is this idea: when you learn anything, you got two neural networks that make a connection. And then once that connection is made, what happens is as you repeat that that connection myelinates. So there's a substance called myelin. It's kind of like the coaxial cable stuff, right? But as that connection myelinates, the effort becomes faster, the energy travels faster. So this is like when you first learn a skill, you have to really think about it, right? You first learn how to drive a stick shift car, you have to really think about it. And as you do it more and more, that connection is myelinating, okay? Which means you end up not having to think about it at all. All this to say that process is accelerated and can be accelerated 10, sometimes 100 times when three things are present in the environment. Those three things are intensity, novelty, and focus, okay? Which is why being told a stove is hot is different than touching a hot stove, because when you touch a hot stove, all three of those things are vehemently present, okay? It's also why we remember the lyrics to our favorite songs or the alphabet song. All this to say, when we fail, when we lose, those three things are very, very present in our environment. It's thick with that, whereas when we win, not so much. So we have to think about loss and struggle and all this stuff as huge opportunities to learn, because that's where the most of the learning does happen, both philosophically and neurologically.
I'll shrink down that little part of the brain that you talked about. It's called the mid-cortex. Is that right?
Yeah, the anterior cingulate mid-cortex. I mean, again, I'm a neuroscientist fan. I'm not a
Boilermakers, I tell you, man. You bring this engineering brain to us. But do you think that's what we used to always call the subconscious? Where's the subconscious exist? Because I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking about it, I'm like, because I know that things that used to be hard for me personally, once I do them enough, to your point, they just don't feel hard anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also what I know is I'm actually more prepared to deal or approach the next hard thing because it just doesn't feel the same. It's like, well, if I want to do it, well, of course I can.
Yeah.
And of
Well,
course there's going to be some loss, you know?
Yeah, there's a couple things going on there. I think, first of all, fear inoculation is a thing, right? And so, in other words, if you do something that scares you and you do it over and over and over again, you're going to slowly inoculate yourself in that context. Now, couple things though. I mean, you have to repeatedly do it, and if there's a break between your inoculation, it may be likely that the fear will come back. So me jumping out of airplanes was always a struggle because I don't like that. I love flying, but I hate open heights, right? So every time I did it was a struggle. Now, sometimes we'd go on jump trips, and over a week's time, we'd do like 50 or 60 jumps. Okay, so by day 3, it's not. I'm kind of just doing it. It's rote at that point.
Is that
But
good,
if
though?
I then
Is
take
that
a
good?
break, huh?
Is that good?
Well, it's good in the sense that I don't have as much fear. You certainly don't let yourself get complacent, right? Because fearlessness is a dangerous thing. However, if I take a break of 6 months and I don't jump for 6 months, it's likely next time I get in the airplane, I'm going to feel that fear again. And like I haven't skydived in 7, 8 years now. So next time I do, if I do, I will likely fear that fear. So inoculation does wear out over time if you're not up to that. So that's one piece, is the inoculation. I think the other idea is in terms of getting it being easier to do things that scare you. That is also contextual. I think, if something is truly frightening us, then we're going to feel that no matter what, regardless of what we've done previous to that. And so, but that part of the brain does allow us to make the decision more effectively, more easily, to be uncomfortable, right? So
you think
it's almost
the
like
inoculation,
you don't get rid of the discomfort. You're able to make a decision to step into it more effectively.
well, that's what I found. If we jump in here to the business world, that's what I found holds so many people back from the thing that they want to achieve and accomplish.
Yeah.
Like if they really put their head down and they started focusing on the necessary tactical things that need to happen to achieve their outcome, it could happen in a way tighter time frame than they believe.
Yes.
Right. And so maybe 90 days, 120 days, 150 days, they can start to see some results. Now, they might not be elite yet, but they're well on their path to get there.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, and the fear, the longer they're willing to stay in that fear and not take action, that's what's delaying them. It's not actually the thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, the fear piece, and so this gets into the technique that I talk about in the second book, right?
So let's get there. So so the masters of uncertainty.
Yeah, so master of uncertainty. So one of the biggest concepts in that book that I highlight for folks is this idea of what's happening neurologically when we are confronted with uncertainty, stress, anxiety, fear, right? And one of the ways we have to define fear, by the way, is a combination of two factors. Those factors are uncertainty plus anxiety. Okay, so in other words, you can have one or the other. You don't necessarily have fear. You can be anxious but not uncertain. Okay, that's maybe someone has to give a presentation next week at their job. They know the presentation, they know the people are giving to them, so they're not uncertain about it, but there's a little bit of anxiety there. Okay, not necessarily fear. You can be uncertain but not anxious. Okay, that's every kid on Christmas Eve. Right? We know there's no fear there. Once you combine the two, that's when you start to get fear bubbling up. One of the ways that we have to understand our ability to effectively move through this stuff is just the way our brain processes the world around us. And one of the things that our brain is constantly trying to do, because we love certainty, is make certain our environment. So define our environment through, oh, I know this, I've seen this. The three factors that it kind of hooks on or tries to understand are duration, pathway, and outcome. So duration, how long is this going to last? Pathway, what's my route in, out, or through? And then outcome, what's the end state? When we are in absence of one or more of those, we begin to feel uncertainty, anxiety, all that stuff come up, and then of course fear. The example for us would be perhaps illness. Okay, so say you and I came down with strep throat. Okay, we know strep throat is a known illness. There's a known antibiotic for it. We also know we don't, at least today in today's environment, don't necessarily die from strep throat. Okay, so we know the outcome. We're going to get better. We know the pathway, antibiotics. What we don't know is duration, because some people respond to antibiotics differently. So for you, it might you might be feeling better by tomorrow. For me, it might take 3 days for me to feel better. So we're an absence of just one, which means our anxiety or uncertainty level is mild. Okay. Now, say we look at either of us get the flu. Okay, the flu is also a known disease. We also know, at least in most society today, we don't die from the flu; we get better. We don't necessarily have a cure for the flu, though. There's no vaccine or medicine you can take for the flu. There's techniques and tricks that people will talk to you about, but there's no known thing you can take for the flu. And we also don't necessarily know how long we're going to be ill for, right? So now we are in absence of duration and pathway, but we know the outcome. So we're in absence of two. So our anxiety, or excuse me, our uncertainty level is now moderate. Now imagine a disease shows up and it's global, and some people are dying from it, some people are not dying from it. There's no known vaccine or cure, and we have no idea how long this is going to last in our society. Enter 2020, right?
I was going to say, it sounds like we're talking about
Yeah.
2020. Come on.
So this is what we were. So we were in absence in that time frame, at least certainly the beginning of all three: duration, pathway, and outcome. This is when we have maximum level of uncertainty. All this to say, we can begin to take control of our environment neurologically by creating our own duration, pathway, outcome by this process I call moving horizons. Moving horizons means I'm going to look around me. I'm going to ask myself, okay, what do I know and what can I control in this moment? I'm going to pick something, and it could be like 10 seconds from now, right? But I'm going to pick something, and in doing so, create a duration, pathway, outcome. A great example was shows Navy SEAL training. You spend hundreds of hours, for example, running around with big heavy boats on your head. Okay, and you do this all day, all night. I remember doing this. It was like 3 a.m. We're on the beach running with these damn boats. We'd been doing it at it forever. I was miserable, as was everybody else, and we were running next to the sand berm. And I remember saying to myself, you know what? I'm just going to focus on getting to the end of the sand berm. That's what I'm going to focus on. And what I did, unbeknownst to me, was I created my own duration. I picked a horizon and created my own duration, pathway, outcome. Duration from now until I get to the end of the sand berm. Pathway from here to end of sand berm. Outcome, end of sand berm. And in doing so, created a micro reward that once I hit that wicket, I gave myself a dopamine reward and allowed me to come back out and pick a new horizon. And so one of the reasons why this technique is so valuable is because it actually allows you to break through fear and bring fear down. Because what you're doing is you're creating certainty from an uncertain environment, and you're taking away uncertainty by creating something certain. You're taking away anxiety by creating a known quantity, a known something to focus on. Because again, anxiety. What we have to understand about anxiety is that anxiety is always in the future. Okay,
worried about something that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, stress is present, anxiety is future, right? So I would say history, the past is history, and the future is fiction. Okay, so anxiety is literally fiction, and so by creating our own horizon and DPO, we are mitigating. We're taking away uncertainty. We just created certainty in our DPO, and we're taking away anxiety because we got nothing to worry about. All we're focusing on is one thing. So you, in essence, take away fear. And so the way this would manifest, for example, jumping out of an airplane, the worst part about jumping out of an airplane, by the way, is the ride up. For guys who don't like to jump.
The anxiety?
Anxiety. Yeah, it's anxiety, yeah. Right? And so the way I would do that is I would begin to focus on things within my control. Okay, I'm going to go through my emergency procedures in my head. I'm going to do that. Okay, now I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to do that. And so before I know it, I'm horizoning myself, DPOing myself all the way until now I'm standing at the edge of the ramp, and my next horizon is nail this exit. Okay, I'm going to nail the exit. I'm going to move through this. And so there are techniques. This is exactly how the highest performing people, and certainly the master of uncertainties, do it, is we mitigate all this stuff by executing processes that are neurologically taking us out of uncertainty and anxiety and putting us in control.
Are you making an argument in thinking here that the size of the win doesn't matter? Any win feels the same from a dopamine perspective?
That's a great point. The answer is no. You have to create what's called meaningful horizons because of the dopamine chemical itself. In other words, dopamine is not just, people think of it as a reward chemical. It's actually a motivation chemical. Dopamine tells us this is good, keep doing this. It's the chemical that gets us up and moving. And so the reason why we have to create meaningful horizons is because one person's horizon may be too long, another person's horizon is too short. If you create a horizon that's too far in the distance, then you're going to run out of dopamine along the way. And anytime you run out of dopamine, you quit. Quitting is simply running out of dopamine. That's what it is. If you create a horizon that's too short, you're not going to get register a sizable enough reward to feel it. Okay, so the horizons are entirely subjective, and they're based on environment and the intensity of the environment. So in other words, sometimes in SEAL training, you're just freezing in the surf zone for what seems like hours. I remember that happening. I remember being in the surf zone, and sometimes I'd be like, I'm just going to count 5 waves. That was my horizon in the moment. Sometimes my horizon was I'm going to wait till the next meal. Sometimes my horizon was I'm going to go to the end of the sand berm. So we have to create meaningful horizons for ourselves that capitalize on our optimal dopamine response, and we can manage that. We can practice and adjust. Like so we may create something that's a little too long. We feel ourselves, oh wait, that's too long, and we shorten our horizon, or make it create something that's too short. It's like that was too short. I'm going to pick another one. All this to say is this is the neurological equivalent of eating the elephant one bite at a time. And if we try to eat the whole elephant, if we look at the entirety, we're going to quit along the way. If we create too small chunks, it's not going to feel good enough. So we have to understand and manipulate that for ourselves.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you like these types of conversations, be sure to follow The Necessary Entrepreneur on your favorite platform so you never miss out on future content. What do you define? I got a second question coming. This one's important to give context. What do you define leadership as?
Leadership is a behavior. That's what I define leadership as. And why do I say that? Because being in charge and being a leader are two separate things. Being in charge is a position. Being a leader is behavior, right? And here's the sobering news: is we don't get to self-designate. We don't get to call ourselves leaders. That's like calling yourself good looking or funny. Okay. Other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow based on the way you behave. If you look back, if you call yourself a leader and you look back and no one's following you, I got bad news for you, right? And sometimes I had this experience in the military where I'd look at someone in a hierarchical position above me and I'd be like, I would not follow that person anywhere. Meanwhile, there's someone over here to my right who has no hierarchical position whatsoever, and I would say I would follow that person to hell and back. It's because of the way we behave. So leadership is based upon our behaviors towards other human beings that allow those human beings to say, that is someone I want to follow. Those behaviors, again, are subjective. You and I could sit here and probably agree upon several leadership attributes that we're like, man, yeah, of course, if I don't see this attribute, I'm not going to consider that person a leader. But even that, someone else might not even consider that attribute as important to them.
So is it better to identify and say, because the second question was about people who find themselves maybe instead of being a leader in a leadership position.
Yeah.
So taking all this stuff that we talked about, all the you and your buddy Andrew that you guys figure out, and all the mental stuff and subconscious and dopamine, and my head spins, and I'm like, I'm a simple human with a simple brain. Break it down. So when people find themselves in leadership positions, what do they do with all this to improve their teams?
Yeah. So part of it is first understanding to be about behavior. So I'm going to behave in a way that allows people to understand, to want to follow me. And again, that's going to be culturally contextual depending on the environment. Okay. There are some go-tos. I think empathy is a go-to, decisiveness is a go-to. In some cases, accountability is a go-to. Right. But so understand that your behaviors are driving whether or not people are choosing you as a leader. However, you're probably still in charge, which means now it's your job to create the highest performing team possible. And part of that process, in my opinion, is to help the team understand their strengths and their weaknesses so that they best mesh together. In other words, how can I create an environment where this team can accelerate together, where people feel free to step up and step back and as needed, so that the team accelerates and can, in fact, be a high-performing team. Again, a high-performing team is a team that performs not only when things are going great, but also when things are not going great. So our job as leaders is to help create that environment. So it's about people. That's what it is. How do you interact with people? How do you get the best out of people? Again, the commonality of every leader is it involves people. And we have to, if we were in a position of leadership, we have to understand that if I want to, in fact, be a leader and not just be in charge, I have to behave in a way that allows and accelerates this team, so that you get the best out of them. And I was always kind of like, hey, you have to. I used to tell this to my junior officers that you have to remember what I call the irony of leadership, and that is if you do your job correctly, you eventually work yourself out of a job because you create a team that can run without you. In many cases, you create a team that runs faster than you. That should be every leader's goal, to be honest with you. And because someone can look back and say, "Ooh, look at that. They are so good that now they're outrunning me." That's the ultimate leadership gift if you created that. But some people don't. They look at that position as a thing, as a
dominant hierarchy of things or something.
Yeah, some sort of medal or award or a positional kind of permission to be. It's an ego based thing, and we know the best leaders are not ego based.
Yeah. But some of them, I look back, I just love watching World War II documentaries and some of the Vietnam stuff and everything. And these big names of Patton and MacArthur and stuff, that seemed like a lot of ego around those guys.
Yeah, well, and some of them had, yeah. Again, what we have to, so a couple of things we have to understand is that there were some of those historical leaders that were absolutely awful. There are some of those historical leaders that were great, and there's books about all of that, right? Just because you are a general or an admiral doesn't mean you're a great leader, and there's many generals and admirals out there, both currently and historically, who are miserable leaders. Okay, so we have to understand that it's not about the rank; it's about how you behave and how you act. And I think the other thing that most people have to understand, especially those who have not experienced the military, people tend to think that the military is this bastion of great leadership, and that is just not the case. The military is a microcosm of regular society. There are some horrific leaders in the military. There really are, and in some cases, the military doesn't do a very good job at developing leaders. There are also some phenomenal leaders in the military, some
that
rock
we don't
stars
even know about, right? That we don't even know their name.
And some of them we don't know their name. Yeah, some of them we do. The McCravens, the McChrystals, those are phenomenal dudes, and I loved working for them. And most of the people who did loved working for them. But yeah, there are others that people don't even know their name, and so every environment when people are involved is an opportunity to explore this stuff, and great leaders can emerge or not.
So I pulled up your on the attributes Instagram. I saw a reel and I took a screenshot of it on my phone over to the side, and it's a picture of a guy that, what is it where a parachute has the big fan on the back?
Oh yeah, parasailing.
Yeah. So, and it
Yeah,
says,
something like or paragliding or something like that.
yeah. And so I think maybe parasailing, I think.
Yeah.
But it says attributes acquired. So I'm just, and it was a video of the guy and his parachute was tangled up.
Right.
I don't know if you know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Attributes required, and then it said situational awareness, compartmentalization, decisiveness, and learnability. Did you take that environment of the video and say what attributes are necessary to get out of this? Am I reading that properly?
That's right. Yeah, because having as someone who's had a parachute malfunction, those are the exact attributes that that you need to get through that. And so situation awareness, again, am I able to look at this situation holistically and understand my environment to the extent that I can actually say, okay, what do I need to focus on right now? Compartmentalization is literally this horizon process. Out of all this stuff, what should I focus on right now and not focus and then ignore? Pick the decisiveness, pick something, pick an action. And then after I pick that action, immediately say, is this working or is this not? And how can I adjust? Right. So
but can we apply those four to any scenario then, or?
I mean, I think, again, I would say a lot of scenarios, but the cool thing about attributes is that different scenarios require different attributes. I mean, there are some scenarios that are going to require discernment. There are some scenarios that are going to require empathy. There are some scenarios that are going to require adaptability. So no, I think the environment is going to dictate what's required, but certainly in high stakes and a lot of high stakes environments where decisions need to be made quickly, so that one might survive. Those are probably good ones to lean upon.
So are we making is Rich making an argument for everything you've learned that the more attributes you just have, or do you need to be elite at them? The more attributes that you have, the higher level of success you're going to rise to in life.
Well, I'll say every one of us has all of the attributes. And so, we all have all 41. The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each. So if we take adaptability, for example, and we, in our assessment tool, like 7 is high on the Likert scale and 1 is low. I'm about a level 6 on adaptability, which means when the environment changes around me outside of my control, it's very easy for me to go with the flow and roll with it. Someone else might be a level 3, which means the same thing happens to them. It's difficult for them to go with the flow and roll with it. They are still adaptable because all human beings are. And so the reason why, so if you're kind of line up these attributes like on a wall, like dimmer switches, all of us would have different dimmer switch settings. And that starts to speak to our own unique performance fingerprints. Okay. The reason why this is important is because the way our attributes stack from 1 to 41 starts to dictate or determine or really highlight how and why we perform the way we do. Your top 5 and your bottom 5 attributes dictate your performance. And I want to tell people, like, just because if you were to take our assessment, for example, and you look at your top 5 and your bottom 5, it's not synonymous with strengths and weaknesses. In other words, you are successful as a human being as much because of your bottom 5 as you are your top 5. It's just, we have to understand how our unique engine shows up in the environments, because also our top 5 and bottom 5 are going to imply some blind spots. In other words, there's things I have to watch out for because I'm high on these and because I'm low on these, right? So it's really about understanding our own unique attributes profile so that we understand how and why we're going to perform the way we are in stress, challenge, uncertainty. We're going to perform this way. Our attributes drive our performance in all environments. But what happens in most normal environments is that we're consciously dialing up or dialing down attributes. So in other words, if you're low on patience, okay, in certain environments, you're going to come into and you say, you know what, I gotta deliberately dial up my patience right now. You're consciously dialing that up. You might be dialing down an attribute. I had a good friend of mine. His top attribute, his number one attribute, was humor. Okay, and I said to him, do you have to sometimes dial down your humor? And he said, oh yeah, sometimes the joke I want to tell is not appropriate at all, right? So I'm dialing that down. That's happening all day, every day in normal life. When the you know what hits the fan, that attribute stack is how we prioritize our behavior. That's how we act without thinking. And understanding that about each other and ourselves becomes a superpower.
Yeah, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking through this about when my brother was in the military and I would drive down to Fort Bragg as a young kid. I would go down there. And I wasn't in the military. Our dad was in the Air Force, but he was the only one of us siblings that was in the military. And I was around a lot of young guys that were immature and that didn't act right.
Yeah.
But I sit here and consistently watch a lot of you guys that came from this Navy SEAL world, and you might know the experience way different behind the scenes when you're hanging out with each other. But it seems like you guys know how to act in society right. And so it's like, man, is that the deviation? Is that even a part of the success in life? It's because maybe it's the adaptability. You just know how to act in scenarios, even if it's not your default. Like, go into an environment and make the decision to act right, to operate properly in this scenario. And so maybe that's another reason why you guys became SEALs and other people didn't.
Yeah, I think first of all, to make it through day one of SEAL training, you have to show up to the beaches of SEAL training with some background in this. So whether it's genetic or whether it's nature or nurture, you show up to the beaches, you've done some of this before. Otherwise, you're not going to make it through day one. Okay. However, you go through training and then of course a career, you hyper develop this ability and these attributes in a way that allows you to operate in almost all environments consistently. But really, all that is the ability to. This is the masters of uncertainty concept. It's the ability to immediately calm down and begin to work the problem by creating horizons. And so what's funny is my wife and I, we live in Virginia Beach. We've been in the same house for about 23 years. Across the street from us, there's a SEAL. Down the road to the right, there's a SEAL. Down the road to the left, there's a SEAL, or at least used to be. But I remember my wife said, I'm so glad these guys are in the neighborhood, because if you weren't home and something went wrong or I needed them, I could go to them and they'd act like you act. And I said, what do you mean by that? It's like all of you, whenever things go wrong or what hits the fan, all of you just calm down and you start working the problem. And this is the habit of mastering uncertainty, is you understand that every environment requires conscious, deliberate decision making, and you have mastered this ability to calm yourself in a way that allows you to focus on the immediate, take care of that, and then focus on the next thing. And again, it doesn't mean it's always pretty. In fact, a lot of times it might be decidedly ugly and hard. And it doesn't mean that the answers are always immediate, right? Sometimes it might be, hey, I'm going to just take 5 breaths. That's my first horizon. And then I'm going to pick my second horizon. But all I can control right now is my 5 breaths. Whatever that is, it's that habit of going through that process. And I think the good news is everybody can generate those habits. Everybody can become a master of uncertainty. We just have to understand how to practice it and start deliberately practicing it.
Can we start with the end in mind and reverse engineer it?
In what way?
And then break the small horizons to get there, or we have to eliminate it's that far off?
Oh, no. Yeah. So part of what and I talk about this in the book, part of what we have to have is the objective. Now, this is different than a purpose. A purpose can be sometimes vague and ethereal in many ways. The objective is purpose made concrete. It's something to focus on that you can then break into chunks. So my purpose was to become a Navy SEAL. Okay, that was going to involve, that's a huge endeavor. So that's going to involve a lot of other steps that I start to break down. And even the step of making it through SEAL training is just one step that I have to break into smaller steps. Even making it through Hell Week, that's another step. So yeah, there's always that objective, but we have to be very comfortable with the fact that our objectives have to be let go of in the process of horizon shifting. Because if you focus on the full elephant, you're going to get overwhelmed. So understand because that objective is driving your behavior for sure. And it needs to drive your behavior, but you have to let it go so you can actually break into smaller chunks. But yes, you always need, there's always going to be some sort of objective and if there's not, I encourage people in the book to decide upon, pick an objective. If you have an overall purpose, like, it might be get healthy. The objective might be, hey, beat this cancer, right? I mean, that's the, pick something that can then be broken into concrete steps, and then break them down into whatever steps you need to.
In those moments of SEAL training that those of us didn't go through, the majority of us didn't. In the moments, well, hey, did you think about quitting?
No, I never really did. And people ask me that all the time. And I can say, what I say with honesty is, I never remember thinking about quitting.
Okay.
I don't remember thinking about quitting.
So in the hardest moments, though, like if you can go back, and we don't have to know what the hardest one was, the one that pushed you to the brink of, since you weren't going to quit, you were going to finish it, but whenever that was, did you ever have the objective in mind that kept you going?
So my answer to that is no, because in the hardest moments, it's just too hard to think about the big thing. But I would also say that there was never, at least to my knowledge, to my memory, there was never any part that, quote, got me to the brink, because of my ability to just focus on something in the moment, to basically pick a horizon and create a DPO. Okay, so
that's the thing we need to work on then.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because what you do is you're essentially just giving yourself a process by which you step through this stuff. You're chunking it down to these meaningful pieces, and you're just going piece by piece by piece. Now, that's not to say there are some guys who will say that, hey, yeah, they were in the hell of whatever, doing whatever, and they look out at the ships and like, I don't want to be on that ship, and they were able to cognitively say, my goal is not to be on that ship. So they stayed in training. I can't say the same thing about myself, but again, this is why horizons and objectives and all this stuff is very individualized. You can't, what works for me might not work for the next guy, and so you just have to pick your poison and go with it.
That's what makes this leadership in this training environment and consulting tough.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, but I think it makes it tough, but it also makes it easy, because you're not responsible for coming up with a formula that works everywhere. The magic formula. What you're responsible for doing is allowing people to start thinking about how they process this stuff, both as individuals and as team members and as leaders, and then begin to create their own pathway. That allows for a much, I think, more a much deeper level of understanding, performance, and improvement.
So you've been on a podcast on the impact theory on Tom Bilyeu's, right?
Yeah.
And he talks about this thing. I'm sad about it, but I'm wondering if I should accept that it's reality. He talks about that he's kind of just kicked adults that don't act properly to the curb, and he's going to these 14-year-old kids because that's where he can help them make a difference and change. Maybe I paraphrase it, right? But in my world of running a business, I don't get them when they're 14.
Yeah.
I get them when they're 25.
Yeah.
I get them when they're 32. So can you talk about that idea about, I mean, if I ever meet Tom, I'm going to be like, dude, you're making me sad here. Like, I'm kind of being real. Like, what are we to do then? If you really have learned that through him building Quest and selling it and running his company, like, what do we do with that?
I think Tom would say, I think Tom would probably say, he found that within the niche he was working, that was an effective strategy for him. And I think I would argue that that's because he found attributes in that niche, in that specific genre that were meaningful for what he was doing. Any one of us in any business and team environment can say, hey, listen, there's specific attributes that are required to do what we're doing here. What I need to do is I need to be cognizant of what they are, and then begin to understand how to look for those, not only in my current team, but also in those people I'm bringing in on the team, so that they mesh and fit culturally well. And understand that, whereas there may be one or two attributes that we all are high on, because that's kind of the binding part of the culture. The best teams are then a combination, a mesh of differing attributes, whereas where a team can now understand how to flex and flow. Because again, one person who's patient, my wife and I, we've been married for 24 years. We consider ourselves a high performing team. Okay. We've lived at war together. We have 2 teenage kids, 2 teenage boys. She is low on patience. Okay. I am high on patience. Now that's worked beautifully for us in our marriage, because when patience has been required, I step up. When impatience is required, she steps up. Her impatience has prevented me from sometimes taking too long on a decision or procrastinating. My patience has prevented her sometimes from going too quickly on a decision or moving too fast. And so there's a ebb and flow that every team can start to capitalize on if we start to understand these qualities effectively. And then understand these qualities about a team. We start to also understand where people fit the best in the team, right? A person's low performance might simply be because we have them in a position that's not capitalizing on their attribute set properly, right? And just shifting them over to another position, their performance skyrockets. So I said, so this is why we do work with multi-generational teams. It has nothing to do with generation. It has nothing to do with age. It has nothing to do with culture. Although I guess you could say culture, and I've been, of course, we're around the world. So certain cultures seem to sometimes have a predominance of certain attributes, but that's beside the point. What this has to do with is how we as human beings are showing up and how we can effectively mesh into this team. And so I'd say Tom probably found that with his projects, a specific niche worked the best. You're going to find the same thing with yours. I'm going to find the same thing with mine. The real work is do the diligence so you understand what you're looking for. You're not missing out.
Do you think that I'm sitting here assuming you're in your 40s? That's what I'm making an assumption.
I'm 50. I'm 51, so almost.
You serious? Yeah. All that running, man, living life. You must be doing well on the health side. What do you think the 61-year-old Rich is going to look back on this 51-year-old Rich? What do you think?
My goal is to look back on the 51-year-old Rich and say, "Ooh, I'm really glad I climbed that mountain." And the 61-year-old Rich is going to have another mountain to be climbing. For me, what I've recognized is I like to have mountains to climb. And it started out with seals, and then inside the seal genre, there are certainly several mountains to climb in there. And then when I retired, when I got out, I said, "Okay, what's my next mountain?" That became authoring, being an author and being an entrepreneur. And so I think what we as humans, if we want to effectively continue growing, we have to figure out what are those things that allow us the inspiration and the motivation to grow. And it's not necessarily about the thing. I'm often asked, hey, how does someone effectively transition or pivot from doing something for 20 plus years and then doing something else? I mean, isn't that a huge shift? And the answer is yes, it is. But the dearth in that identity is not going to come from just because you're not doing the thing. What we have to say is, what is it about the thing that allowed me the happiness and the fulfillment? And then whatever that answer is, go find that in another thing. For me, I like the challenge of picking a nice big mountain to climb and climbing it. And I did that in the SEAL teams. And now I'm doing that in the business world with my wife. We get to do it together, which is even better. At 61, we'll see what that mountain looks like. And if I'm at the top of this one that I'm working on, then cool. I'm going to pick another one. What that is, I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't know what it was either because you thought you were going to be a pilot.
That's right. Even you have to be adaptable and flexible. And again, I'm always kind of like, when it comes to goal setting, be resolute in the objective, but be flexible in the approach. And again, my goal as a young man, as a teenager, wasn't necessarily, I mean, pilot was the means, but I just wanted to serve my country. I wanted to be kind of cool, unique, and special. Do something really cool, unique, and special. Okay, that was really, if I were really honest with myself, what the overall purpose was for me. Pilot was the thing I focused on for a lot of years until I learned about the SEALs. I was like, ooh, well, who are these guys? And so again, I accomplished my objective, my purpose. I accomplished the purpose through a change in objective. I shifted from being a pilot to being a SEAL. We just have to understand what those are. So we all have a why. We all have a purpose. We all have things that drive us and fulfill us. There's a very useful argument for conducting the work to figure out what that is. And it doesn't have to be huge and life changing or global. It can be fairly internal. It can be, hey, I want to climb a mountain. I want to be climbing a mountain. If I'm not working towards something, I feel like I'll start to die.
Yeah, right.
And I'm 51. I plan to live well past.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't seem like a guy that has that in your near horizon here, dying.
Yeah, that's right.
But so you got out of high school probably in like 92.
91, yeah. Graduated 91.
Went to 95, 96, you're out of Purdue, ROTC. You get into the military. It seems like for you to be, my word, but for you to be a warrior, 6 years later, 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
Not that there's all these bad things that happen, but the preparedness is what puts you in the right spot when things pop off and they happen. You're ready. I mean,
Yes.
you probably in your career, mid to late 20s, you were the guy that every soldier prepared to be when something like that happened. It hit you at the time.
It certainly did. It's funny you should say that. So growing up, being a pilot, my brother and I. So my two favorite books growing up were Chuck Yeager's autobiography, Yeager, and then The Right Stuff. Those two books. I read them multiple times. All I wanted to be when I was growing up was a World War II fighter pilot because it seemed like that was the heyday for fighter pilots. It was a hog heaven. I mean, those guys, the P-51, the Spitfires,
What would you been a flying? What would you done a Spitfire against the Germans when they put that jet on them? What would that have felt like with a guy flying by at 100 or 200 miles an hour?
It changed the game, but you think of it, just reading about that, I knew that this was when fighter pilots had their heyday. It was World War II. Because by the time I wanted to be a fighter pilot in the 80s, 90s, now you had the F-14, which had the Phoenix missile. You could shoot planes from 100 miles away. So dogfighting, even though Top Gun tried to make it think people were doing it, they weren't really dogfighting anymore. So all this to say is I just happened to go into the SEAL teams. When I joined the SEAL teams, again, 96, very few people knew what Navy SEALs were. Very few people. You had to search to find books about Navy SEALs. Okay. And then the war started, and we started to hit this accelerant in terms of what we were doing, the missions we were asked to do, the missions we were conducting both successfully and unsuccessfully. And this curve just went insane. And all of my peers will agree. We all say that whenever I have coffee, we agree that we hit the hog heaven of the SEAL teams. We really did. We hit this. We just happened to hit at a timing where we got to do exactly what it was we were training to do, and do it at a very, very intense and in many ways global level. And so even though war sucks, and I will always say, I'm not a pacifist, but I can embrace the idea of I embrace the ideas of pacifism. I think that I'm incredibly grateful because I got to really live the hog heaven of the SEAL teams and the special operations. And again, it's going to change now. Again, something else will happen, and then something else will go. But yeah, we got to do. All of us knew it. We knew it in the moment. We were doing what we literally trained to do. And the guys who joined after or a little bit late, a lot of them got joined in. There's like, oh shoot, you're not doing this anymore, and they felt like they missed out. But that happens after the Vietnam War as well too. So it just happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm incredibly grateful that we.
So what about, as we have a few more minutes here, what about technology and AI? And man, the pace of things is just picking up. So there's a lot of conversation going on about it. Do you think the old world tactics of focus and resilience and facing uncertainty, do you think those things are still going to play and help people win at the level they used to, even in this fast pace of technology and AI? Do you think yes, or is it unknown?
Maybe I'm an optimist here, but I feel like I inadvertently wrote books and got myself into a space that is exactly where it needs to be today, because the way we're going to accelerate our success in the global world of AI is through attributes. What AI is going to take over all the skills-based stuff, right? But we have to have the attributes to be able to adjust, to modify, to evolve. The other reason why is because what do we all feel nowadays in today's environment? We feel a ton of uncertainty. Sometimes some of us feel more uncertainty than we have ever felt before. All of this stuff in terms of being able to move through this is absolutely applicable. And I think these are things we have to focus on to get us into the next phase of evolution. Attributes, uncertainty, all this stuff. So I like to think I'm hitting the next hog heaven here, but I and it's not just because I do it every day, but I think I really know. I mean, AI is going to take over skills-based stuff, but what AI doesn't have necessarily right now are attributes. We'll see what happens, but we have attributes. We're going to bring our attributes to this new world and bring our ability to move through uncertainty to this new world as well.
You love uncertain times, don't you?
Well, I love uncertain times. I guess I love the ability of human beings to excel. And it's this idea that we've gone from cave dwellers to space explorers just excites me. For me, evolution and discovery is one of the most exciting things ever. And my only regret is that we will have a limited lifetime, so we won't be able to see. We won't be able to see what's going to be going on 200, 300 years from now. But because imagine if the people in the 1700s or 1800s could even get a glimpse of
No,
what's
they
going
think
on.
we were aliens. They would think we were
Right.
aliens.
Yeah, and we the same thing us. So we all have our own evolutionary space, right? But I just love it. The potential of human beings, I think, is remarkable, and I think the potential of human beings for good. Obviously, we have potential for bad, but I think the potential of human beings fascinates me and excites me. So
I think this thing you're talking about mastering uncertainty, it's what Warren Buffett has done with investing, right? And he said, you buy more when there's blood in the streets. And what he's talking about is when everyone else feels uncertain times, he's stoic, and he knows when the place is on fire, you can sit back and say, where's the opportunity when everybody else is fleeing?
that's right. That's right.
And it almost seems like this is the thing you're training, what you're trying to have people believe in. Like, hey, listen, like in the times of the most stress or the most anxiety, the world and a lot of people around you are going to be feeding it, going to be living in it. Take a step back. You can probably crush and grow in immense ways in those times.
100%. In the book, in the right before as I start my book, I have a quote from Eric Fromm, and the quote is, "Uncertainty is the very condition to impel man to unfold his powers." And I truly believe that it's uncertainty is where we grow. It's that space that we cannot grow without stepping outside of our comfort zone. It's not possible. So the more we can do it. So the reason why I get excited about what we talk about is not only are there ways that we can help people just do better when it hits, but you start getting good at this stuff, you begin to deliberately step outside your comfort zone. You begin to deliberately pick the next mountain and say, this is where I want to go. And that's when the real evolution happens. And I think we're all going to benefit from it, and our kids will too.
Break my argument down and tell me where it's wrong. I believe that all of my success in life started as like this 12-year-old kid that learned how to pull weeds properly.
Yeah.
Because a guy that I worked doing landscaping when I was 12 years old, I knew when I pulled a weed and I didn't get the root, that the weed was going to come back. And I attributed it to the really wealthy lady driving by in her Jaguar that had paid him to have us pull the weeds.
Right.
That if we didn't do that well, it was going to come back and he was probably going to get in trouble, not keep the account, and not do what we signed up for. And then taking that same idea of seeing something through and doing everything well like that leads you to victory every time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. There's nothing wrong about that argument. What I will add to that philosophy is that it doesn't only happen when we're kids. Our brains are plastic. Our neural plasticity is always present from birth until we die. It does get a little harder as we get older. The plasticity goes down, and we're sponges at the beginning. In our youth, from birth to about 22, we're just sponges. We're entirely plastic. But plasticity has been proven. We can learn at any age. And so I think it's worth everybody to take a look at their history and see, okay, what are the lessons I can draw from? Because we all have them, draw from those, but then also make sure we're actively continuing to learn, continuing to grow, continuing to exercise that plasticity in our brain. Because again, I think anytime we stop moving is when we start dying, so
Is it because there's too many things in our brain as we get older and stack responsibilities where we just don't have clarity of just one or two things? Because when we were 12 and 14 and 16, it felt like we had a lot of responsibility, but we didn't in comparison to adulting.
Yeah, I don't know about that. We'd have to consult the neuroscientists on that. I think from what I understand is that it more has to do with just the neural networks in our brains. As they get more mapped, these pathways they become superhighways as we grow older. So we never lose these superhighways. So whenever someone quits smoking, that neural network, that pathway of being a smoker is always going to exist. But what they've done is they've created a new neural pathway of a non-smoker when they quit smoking. It's why everybody who's quit smoking will tell you, hey, if I'm not careful, I might relapse. When I smell a cigarette sometimes, like, ooh, I just feel like I want to, because that roadway still exists. And so I think it's just a matter of us. It's very easy for our brains to create a new neural pathway. It's much more difficult for us to get off of a superhighway and start a dirt road and go down that dirt road and create a new superhighway. So I think part of it is that, but I think we'll defer to the neuroscientists on the other.
And then for the final one here, since you come from a military background, in boot camp, did they completely tear you down and the person that you were and the way you thought to build you back up? Is that real?
Well, no. First of all, I never went to boot camp. I just went to SEAL training. The SEAL training was my boot camp. But no. So depending on the service, okay, boot camp, like the Marines, for example, are actually pretty good at, and I won't even say tearing down. I think that's the wrong word, but
reprogramming,
inculcating an ideology and a philosophy that changes that human. Right? You are creating a whole different way of thinking, and Marines do this brilliantly. So I think in most boot camps, they're trying to figure that out in terms of, hey, these are our ethics. This is what we're doing. We're gonna try to really mold and shape you. SEAL training, that type of boot camp, is something different. They're breaking you down, but it's not in the context of, hey, we're gonna build you up to be someone we want you to be. In special operations, it's much more about, we're gonna break you down so that we make you understand you can operate from any position, from any place. I don't care how bad you think it is. You can still persevere. You can still do stuff, and they encourage creative thinking. They encourage new ideas. They encourage innovations. Why spec operators just holistically, on average, we're just rule breakers. We do our own thing. We don't like conditions and rules and constrictions. We want to do our own thing. That's what the spec ops community does. So they break you down in a way that allows you to understand, hey, I have confidence that no matter what happens, I will perform, and then I will also execute independent, creative thinking to the problem in a team environment, in the context of a team, not a selfish way, but in a selfless way that allows the team to come up with solutions that are just unheard of.
So that's what Rich is trying to do for the business world and everybody who's not in the military in 2025.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Hey, thanks for joining us, man. What an awesome hour and a half of my day.
Well, thank you. It's been great for me too. I appreciate the conversation. I'm glad we're connected now, so we can stay.
Go buy the book. Right, I'm sure it's on Amazon, and right.
It is.
Is there an
Amazon?
Audible?
Also at theattributes.com. You can see everything we do. You can get the book there too at theattributes.com. But yes, definitely on Amazon as well. So where books are sold.
All right, man. I'm pumped to follow you. Thanks for joining us, and have an awesome summer.
Thank you, brother. You too.
All right, man.